Did you withdraw the money? You got paid, right? Why do you say it like it's so obvious? In these 5 years, even when I've given you money, you haven't said thank you once. If you're working full-time and living at home, it's only natural for you to contribute money. You should be grateful for being raised up to this point. I understand what you mean, Mom. What's wrong? You're unusually confrontational today. What's the matter? Is something wrong? She's being weird, saying there's no thank you even when she gives money. Did you really say that? You got to go to university because we raised you. Don't you think contributing money is a way to repay that? It's your duty as the eldest daughter. I understand that I need to contribute money since I live at home, but aren't I supporting all 3 of you who aren't working? That's not right. I do work, just not as a full-time employee like you. Are you saying part-time jobs don't count as working? So, you want to use all the money you earn for yourself without repaying your parents. What do you think of us? If you don't want to contribute money, you can't live here. Get out quickly. Well, it's going to be hard for someone who can only work like you to live alone, sis, haha. For the past 5 years, I have been giving money to my family every month. It seemed natural to give up my earnings to support my family. I was so pressured that I never questioned it. But now, I am different. Finally, I realized that the situation I was in was not right. Thank you. I'll leave the house. If I leave, they will lose the support they took for granted and will surely regret it. As expected, a month passed, and finally my phone rang. My name is Bridget. I am not yet married and have never left my parents' house. Even if I work, living at home often makes people think I'm dependent on my parents. However, the reality is quite different. There are reasons why I have been living at home until now. Let's go back a bit and start from my childhood. I was 7 years old when my sister was born. She's really a cute child. She's your sister, Bridget. Get along well with her. I'll protect her because I'm the big sister. I vividly remember how my father, Douglas, and my mother, Cheryl, were delighted by the birth of their second child. Back then, he would often tease my sister, Mary, and get scolded by my mother. He probably couldn't help but adore her. I, too, was looking forward to playing with Mary. But I could never come to like Mary. Mom, do you know where my gym bag is? Isn't it hung up? You should prepare it yourself. Normally, I always hang my gym bag on the hook in the living room shelf. Since it wasn't there, I asked my mother. Despite this, my mother seems completely indifferent to me, always responding coldly. Usually I end up finding it in the drawer where it often gets mixed with other clothes when my mother is in a hurry or doesn't notice. Each time I have to thoroughly search through all the drawers in the house. The moment I finally found the bag, unfortunately, my mother came to the spot. What are you doing? The drawers are a mess. I'm sorry. You require more care than Mary. Even as an elementary school student, I couldn't accept this situation. But even if I believed in my heart that I was not at fault, the moment I was yelled at loudly by my parents, I unconsciously convinced myself that I was to blame. Such is the psychology of a young child. Since my sister was born, my mother started to get angry with me often. From that time, I gradually became unable to say anything to my mother. Moreover, I started to feel the same fear towards my father. What did you buy? A toy for Mary. I thought Mary would like it. I want a toy too. I'll buy you one next time. But you've been saying that for a while. It's always Mary, that's not fair. What's not fair? I buy it because I want to. If you keep saying, buy it, it makes me not want to buy it. The moment my father's yelling echoed, my sister started crying, and he hurriedly picked her up to stop her crying. My presence, with a face about to cry, was completely ignored. No one cared about me. Mother's scolding was painful, but the overwhelming intimidation in father's shouting voice was something I found very hard to endure. I was always tense and scared in front of my father. Mother never stood up for me. Hey, Mom. You get scolded for being jealous of Mary and begging for toys, especially because you're the older sister, and don't you understand? Instead, come over here and help me. My mother handed me a soapy sponge to help with the dinner cleanup. Gripping the foamy sponge handed to me by my mother, I washed the dishes one after another, as if it were a part of my routine. Thanks for taking care of the cleanup. My mother left the spot and went to take care of my sister. While I could feel the presence of my parents amusing and taking care of my sister behind me, I had no choice but to silently continue washing the dishes alone. When the second child is born, it's inevitable that the time spent with the first child decreases. As a result, it's common to feel loneliness and solitude. Even though the older child is still young, they are often expected to help with household chores and childcare as part of their role. Of course, parenting is tougher than one might imagine, and particularly when parents lack the time or emotional capacity. It can become difficult to give enough attention and love to the children. However, as time passes and children grow older, these issues often naturally get resolved by themselves. I tried to convince myself that the different treatment I received was because my sister was still young. But the reality was completely different from what I had anticipated. Instead, the situation worsened, and the difference in how my parents treated me and my sister became even more pronounced. "I have a request for you, Dad." "What is it? Tell me." "Can you buy me the clothes listed here?" "How much do they cost? I hope it's not expensive." "Please, I really want this one." "All right, I'll talk to your mom about it." "Yay, I love you, Dad." My sister picked up the magazine, swinging it around like a toy and laughing happily. I only got gifts from my parents on special days like birthdays or Christmas. But it was different for my sister. If she said she wanted something, even if they are trivial items, our parents would immediately buy it for her. Seeing how my sister always managed to get things, I gathered a little courage and tried asking as well. However, the response was surprisingly dismissive, and with a simple "be patient" it was settled, and I lost the energy to persist further. As my sister grew, my parents increasingly did whatever she asked, and the gap in how they treated us grew. Speaking of which, what about the laundry? Wanting to be a good child, I went to hang the laundry without arguing back at my mother. As these days continued, I gradually began to gauge my parents' moods. I constantly felt worried about how they saw me, and I couldn't truly relax even when I was at home. Feeling uncomfortable in the house and wanting to change my living environment at this juncture by going to the university, I decided to discuss it boldly with my parents. "I'm thinking of living on my own once I'm in college. I'll manage the rent and living expenses by working part-time. Is that okay?" "Living alone? You mean moving out?" "What's gotten into you suddenly? Living alone is dangerous." "That's right. Dad would be sad if you were to leave, Bridget. We're worried about you." Though they didn't approve of me living alone, I didn't argue strongly and gave up on the idea. Initially, I felt that my parents were only particularly interested in my sister, but what they said seemed to indicate that my feelings were just a one-sided misunderstanding. My parents seemed to care for me as their daughter, and my father especially seemed saddened by the thought of me leaving. Seeing their reaction, the cloud in my mind cleared, and I felt relieved. Perhaps surprised by my desire to live alone, I noticed a clear change in my parents' attitudes. My mother stopped imposing housework on me, and my father began to show concern for me. I was relieved that I no longer had to worry about my parents' moods, but when university life started, I was greeted by a routine no different from before. "What's for breakfast today?" "I've been up all night and haven't made it yet." "You haven't made it yet? What time do you think it is?" "Don't neglect your chores just because you're going to university. You have to work for your tuition." "Good morning. Sis, is the breakfast ready yet?" "I'll make it quickly, so please wait a bit longer." Rushed as I was, I grabbed the hot toast from the toaster without a second to spare and placed it on a plate. No matter how busy I was, nobody would help me. Until I brought breakfast to the table, they continued to sit on the sofa watching TV without moving much. My chores did not stop at preparing breakfast. I was responsible for many other household tasks. Dinner preparation, cleaning, and laundry. I basically handled all household chores. Previously, I believed that my parents cared about me and that's why they want me to live alone, but I realized that this was a misunderstanding. As my graduation approached, I resolved once again to leave this house. "Dad, Mom, I want you to listen. After I graduate from university, I will live alone." "Do you want to live alone that much? Why don't you stay here until you get married?" "That's right. After all the trouble we went through to send you to university, you want to leave us as soon as you graduate? Don't trample on our feelings. Are you planning to abandon us when we're no longer useful?" I felt that my parents would not allow me to live alone, because they would have to do the household chores and cleaning without me. But this time, I was determined not to yield to their opposition and to stick to my own will, no matter what. However, both of my parents cried and begged me not to leave, saying it was cruel to abandon them. Faced with a side of my parents I had never seen before, I found myself moved and once again had to give up on the idea of living alone. This incident was truly a moment that could have changed my destiny. Since I didn't push through with living alone, my life thereafter became much harder. After graduating from university, I secured a job in sales at an insurance company. I work from early morning until late at night, constantly busy with daily tasks. Despite this, the situation where I am almost solely responsible for the household chores has not changed. Furthermore, now that I'm earning an income as a working adult, my parents and sister Mary have started asking me for anything they want. It's almost your first payday. What should we have you buy? What are you talking about? I've got my eye on a store. I want something too, big sis. A family discussion was held to decide what to buy with my first paycheck. However, it felt as if my presence was completely ignored. Watching the three of them talking happily, I felt so detached, as if I wasn't really there. The same thing continued every time I received my paycheck. If it had just been them coming to me with their cute requests, I might have been able to accept it. But after 3 months, they started saying it was bothersome to tell me what they wanted, and simply demanded the money. Even though they are family, I should be able to refuse when they demand money. However, perhaps due to the trauma from my childhood or my desire to be a good child, I found myself unable to say anything to my parents and ended up giving them money reluctantly. Give me some too. Even my sister Mary was someone I couldn't talk back to. In this house, it seems that my parents and sister are ranked above, and I am the only one below. I even found myself unable to refuse money to my sister, who is still in middle school. For the first few months, the amounts they asked for were small, so I thought a little bit wouldn't hurt. However, as the amounts gradually increased, I began to feel doubtful. I've brought this month's share. Thank you for your hard work this month. When I handed over the envelope, my mother received it as casually as if she were taking a remote control. As a new employee, my income was about $2,500. Within a year, I found myself giving most of my salary to my family. I only had about $200 for myself each month. Managing on $200 was more difficult than I expected. I couldn't afford to go out to eat with friends or visit the hair salon. My days were just back and forth between home and work, and I had to stay at home even on weekends. At work, as I didn't groom myself well, baseless rumors started spreading around, suggesting I was either struggling financially or being deceived by a man. Unable to discuss the truth, I had no choice but to ignore the gossip at work. As this situation continued, before I knew it, 5 years had passed, and I had turned 28. It's not that I simply went through these 5 years without saying anything. While I didn't achieve results that drastically changed my situation, I definitely made some small efforts. Can I reduce the money I give to everyone a bit? Is that okay? There's no way that's okay. What are you talking about? My father's angry face was right in front of me. I could feel the intensity as if he was about to attack me. I'm sorry. As my father walked away from me, I realized that I had been unconsciously holding my breath, and I finally exhaled deeply, feeling relieved. Whenever I hesitate to hand over my salary, my parents use various methods to pressure me. 5 years into my job, my monthly salary has reached about $3,000. Among my peers, this amount is quite good, and it's also because I have worked very hard. However, the reason for this effort is not necessarily praiseworthy. Hasn't your salary increased at all? Isn't it supposed to go up based on performance and sales? Aren't you working hard enough? I'm really trying my best. Stop making excuses and work harder. I have been working even harder than before, and as a result, my salary has increased. However, since I have to give all of the increased portion of my salary to my family, I still only have $200 left for myself. The misguided reasons for my efforts have led to several changes around me. My parents retired 2 years ago and switched to part-time jobs. Despite working part-time, they do not seem to be working desperately. Despite my hard work, my parents often spend their days relaxing at home. $3,000 a month is a typical amount for a family of 4 to live on. and my salary is barely enough to support my entire family's lifestyle. My parents, who do not have to worry about living expenses, freely use the money they earn from part-time jobs. I'm home. Oh, welcome back. When I returned home, I saw my parents enjoying sweets in the living room. To the outside world, my parents' lifestyle may not seem much different from other families. However, living on $200 myself, their actions of enjoying sweets seem incredibly luxurious to me. What's that? It's pudding. There's some for you in the fridge too. Sensing my return, my sister came out of her room to have dinner. As I started preparing dinner, my sister took the pudding from the fridge and began eating it. When I opened the fridge to get the ingredients, I found that the pudding I had been looking forward to was gone. My sister happily eats pudding with our parents, but at 21, she is also a part-timer like them. Even after graduating high school, she didn't pursue further studies or find full-time employment, instead continuing to live on my parents' support. However, since my parents themselves rely on my income, in the end, my sister is also depending on my income through my parents. Others might find this situation bizarre and feel conflicted about it. However, having grown up always watching and adjusting to my family's moods, I no longer knew how to escape this situation. I was living each day with a resigned feeling, as if I would spend my entire life for my family. In the midst of this, a turning point in my life suddenly occurred. As part of an effort to make the workplace more comfortable for employees, the company decided to appoint a counselor. However, whenever something is introduced for the first time, everyone tends to be cautious. Therefore, the company decided to select one person from each department to undergo counseling. It was made voluntary, but no one volunteered. No one wants to cut into their work time to attend counseling. Such unwanted tasks always end up being my responsibility. Due to my plain appearance and my inability to resist, no matter how troublesome the role, I am inevitably targeted. I'll do it. While sighing inwardly, I slowly raised my hand to indicate that I would attend the counseling. Afterward, I was set to speak with the counselor in a corner of the office. Is there anything you are struggling with? This is why I ended up seeing the counselor. I don't have the courage to speak about such things. Nothing in particular. I was asked about my current job and relationships, and I planned to answer vaguely and end the conversation. Unexpectedly, when asked about my family, I hesitated a bit. Is there anything troubling you regarding your family? Caught off guard, I stumbled over my words, unable to find the right thing to say. I had expected questions about work, so being asked about my family was unexpected. Since people are generally cautious about private matters, it is usual not to delve too much into such topics. Despite this, I was surprised that the counselor brought up the topic of my family. I had to admit they were truly professional. Perhaps while listening to me, the counselor sensed that the problem lay more with my home environment than with my workplace. Thinking that it was pointless to hide it, I decided to talk about my relationship with my parents and sister, and my current situation. As I spoke, the counselor's expression gradually became more serious. When I finished talking, the counselor took a deep breath and slowly started speaking. This is essentially domestic violence, isn't it? Is this considered DV? From what you've told me, it feels like a financial DV. The relationship with your parents, especially, seems to be problematic. I couldn't help but raise my voice in surprise at the unexpected words from the counselor. There are various types of DV, and commonly, people think of physical violence. However, I learned that there are also forms of DV that affect the mind, like psychological abuse and power harassment, and financial DV, which I am currently experiencing. According to the counselor, there seems to be a particular issue with how and why I ended up giving money to my parents. The intimidation I received from my parents and the situation where I had to watch their moods have deeply rooted themselves, influencing my actions unconsciously. Occasionally, they used apologies to make me feel guilty or treated me kindly to delude me into thinking I was needed, making it difficult for me to separate from my family. This is a typical method of DV, and it seems I am being mentally dominated by my family, making it hard for me to break away. It feels like I'm struggling financially, but sometimes I think it might be an exaggeration. I think you've become unable to see your situation objectively." After that answer, the counselor began writing something on a piece of paper. I felt a bit uneasy at the sound of the pen. What can I do to change this situation? Instead of trying to change the situation immediately, start by valuing your own feelings more than your family's. While listening to the counselor, I was deep in thought. I had never thought about valuing my own feelings before. Even after the counseling session ended, my emotions remained complicated. As I headed home, my heart still felt cloudy. On the train, I saw my reflection in the window. My hair was disheveled, my clothes wrinkled, and my face, poorly made up, looked terrible. Disappointed by my appearance, I felt a desire to take better care of myself. In my current situation, I definitely don't have enough money to maintain a proper appearance. I work, so why should I only have $200 to spend? I began to question. Why do I have to support my family? The sway of the train seemed to help sort out the chaos of my thoughts and feelings. To clear my mind, I decided to muster a little courage. Did you withdraw the money? You got your paycheck, right? When I arrived home, before saying hello, my mother began asking for money. It was clear that for her, receiving such a large amount like $3,000 had become routine, accepted as normal without any special feelings. But I still couldn't completely clear my mind and ended up giving her the money without saying anything. However, thanks to the counseling, I was now more aware of the subtle changes in my mother's expressions and attitudes that I normally wouldn't notice. Isn't your salary going up a little more? You are working seriously, right? Why can you only say things like that? In these 5 years, even when I've given money, you haven't said thank you once. If you're working full-time and living at home, it's only natural for you to contribute money. You should be grateful for being raised up to this point. I understand what you mean, Mom. What's wrong? You're unusually confrontational today. She approached me with an intense look. I stood firm without fleeing from her stern gaze. For the first time, I closely observed my mother's irritated expression. Despite being overwhelmed by her intensity, I couldn't help but notice that her eyebrows were a bit unkempt. I don't know if they heard our conversation, but my father and my sister came out of the room. "What's the matter? What happened?" She's saying weird things. She's complaining that we don't thank her even when she gives us money. Did you really say that? You went to university because we raised you? Don't you think contributing money is a way to repay us? It's your duty as the eldest daughter. Despite their unreasonable words, my mother and sister were nodding and laughing. The old me might not have realized how abnormal this situation was. I am not the same person I used to be. I understand that I need to contribute money since I live at home, but isn't it wrong that I'm supporting all 3 of you who aren't working? We do work, you know. We're not full-time employees like you, but does that mean working part-time jobs isn't the same as working full-time? So you want to use all the money you earn for yourself without repaying your parents? What do you think of us? If you don't want to contribute money, you can't live here. Get out quickly. Well, it's going to be hard for someone who can only work like you to live alone, sis haha. Their arguments felt utterly irrational, and gradually I lost the energy to deal with this absurdity. I understand that part-time jobs are also respectable work, but in reality, all 3 of them barely go to work. I know that my parents and sister aren't living in excessive luxury, but I cannot deny the fact that they are being supported by my money. Because I was supporting all 3 of them with my money, I had no choice but to stay at home even on my days off. Honestly, there's some truth to what my sister says about whether I can live alone or not. In reality, for the past 5 years, my life has been nothing but a cycle between home and work, so I might lack general knowledge and skills related to everyday living. There's a possibility that I don't even know things that would surprise those around me. I don't even know how electricity bills are paid. Lacking basic knowledge, I end up feeling embarrassed in various situations. Thinking this way, the old me would have decided against living alone. But now, every time I hear their words, I feel the anger that was dormant deep within me rising again. I notice that my hands are clenched, and I feel a heat spreading throughout my body. The cloudiness in my mind had already disappeared. Why do I have to support my family? Why do I have to be treated this way? I finally realize that this situation is wrong and start taking actions to escape it. Thank you, I'm leaving home. Saying this, I tried to leave the house as if I was going to work. "What are you talking about? Wait. We were wrong. Forgive us. Don't be stubborn, and let's live together in peace. Don't leave us behind. We'll be lonely." The three of them, panicked by my actions, desperately tried to persuade me to stay. They clung to me, crying, as if they understood me, just like they always do. It was exactly the typical method of DV that the counselor had taught me. It was obvious from an objective viewpoint. I was made painfully aware of how foolish I had been before. "Goodbye. Are you really planning to live on your own?" It might have been completely unexpected for the three of them that I would actually leave home. As a result, they froze, becoming speechless as if they had lost their words. Thinking that this moment might be the last time I see my parents and sister, I imprint their astonished expressions firmly in my memory. Leaving home to live on my own. It was just that simple. By doing this, they might come to regret their previous attitudes towards me. A month later, my dream of living alone finally began. It's natural to feel uneasy at first. However, this unease gradually faded, and I slowly became accustomed to living alone. Then I started to truly enjoy the freedom of a life unbound by family. Yet, just as I was settling into my pleasant solitude, the last few days have been marked by my phone's incessant ringing. After work, when I checked my mobile, there were over 100 missed calls. The callers were only my parents and sister. I considered ignoring them, but I was a bit curious about how the three of them had been managing over the month, so I called my sister. "How many times do you think I called? Big sis, come back home." My sister sounded on the verge of tears, genuinely pleading for help. It was the reaction I had expected. The $3,000 I used to give my parents had been their entire living expenses. Now it was gone. Even if it wasn't $3,000, they needed to earn at least the minimum amount to survive, which my parents and sister weren't used to. It was unlikely that the three of them, who had hardly worked at all before, would suddenly find jobs. Realizing they couldn't make ends meet, it seemed they had considered getting employed. However, my parents had already passed 60 years old and had a significant employment gap, making it difficult for them to find reemployment. Additionally, there were hardly any companies willing to hire my sister, who had no work experience. They had been living a lifestyle where they would spend the entire $3,000 monthly, including any earnings from part-time jobs, so there was hardly any money left in their bank accounts. The three of them had quit their part-time jobs recklessly to focus on job hunting. With no income, they ran out of food and had no choice but to contact me. That's a tough situation. I hope you find employment soon by then. I had no intention of helping them anymore, so I decided to just listen and then end the call. No matter how many times I think about it, I can't find a satisfying explanation for why I had prioritized my family over myself to such an extent. Looking back, my parents' and sister's behaviors were unreasonable, but I had continued to deal with them all along. I was mentally and emotionally unstable, probably unable to recognize my poor judgments. I've come to realize again how psychological control and domination can have a serious impact on one's consciousness and emotions. While my parents and sister seem to be struggling, I am living peacefully. Now that I am free from a life dominated by my parents, I am truly relishing the joy of building my own life with my own hands. I've decided to prioritize my feelings first. For now, I think I'll go shopping for things I like on my day off tomorrow. I never imagined being told by my parents, who adore my genius sister, that I was no longer needed. Having one child is enough. We don't need a failure like you. Sandy needs a lot of money to bloom her talents, so if you can pay the monthly rent of $1,000, we might reconsider. My parents decided to kick me out of the house while I was still young. My uncle reached out to help me, unable to hide my confusion. "Though I'm poor, if you don't mind, Emily, I'd really like to be your parent," he said. I immediately accepted his offer. My name is Emily. I am now 30 years old, but my life has a complex background. Before talking about my family environment, please listen to my story. I was born to a typical salaryman father and a stay-at-home mother. We lived with my grandparents in my father's family home, where my unmarried uncle also lived. I started living with my uncle when I was 4 years old. He was 24 at the time. Living at home at that age might not be so unusual. However, my uncle had special circumstances that kept him from leaving home. He had been frail since childhood and continued to have health problems as an adult, making it difficult for him to hold a steady job, so he ended up living a life of irregular part-time work. Working just a few hours a few days a week was not enough income to live on his own. Perhaps feeling inferior because he was dependent on his parents, my uncle always looked guilty. I frequently witnessed my father yelling at my uncle, "You really are a burden." Such incidents were limited to when my grandparents were not around. My grandparents loved both their healthy son and their frail son without discrimination. With decreased income due to the recession and being forced to live together, my father seemed to want to behave modestly in front of his parents. However, in places where they were absent, my father was always harsh, contemptuous, and mocking toward my uncle. Seeing this, my uncle would just look sad, never getting angry or talking back. "Why don't you get angry?" I once asked innocently as a child. With a puzzled look, my uncle replied, "Because I really am receiving support from my parents." As a child, I accepted that reasoning, but as an adult, I think my father is receiving the same support, so he has no right to criticize. If I had understood that at the time, I would have supported my uncle. Unable to grasp it as a child, I felt uncomfortable when my father raised his voice at my uncle but couldn't speak up. It's true that the atmosphere was peaceful when my grandparents were around. Under their watch, my uncle would smile gently, and my father would hide his emotions and behave accordingly. My mother was too busy caring for my young sister and me to pay attention to the relationship between my father and my uncle. As a child, I believed these days would last forever. However, our everyday life changed unexpectedly. My grandparents died in an accident. I was 6 years old at the time. My sister and I cried bitterly, overwhelmed by deep sadness and loneliness. I clearly remember my uncle also quietly shedding tears. But what I can't forget is my father's laughter. Yes, he was laughing. Despite the death of his own parents, he never cried. Not when we rushed to the hospital, not while preparing for the funeral. It wasn't just that he was composed, it was clear to me, even as a child, that my father was not grieving. And that conviction only grew stronger. On the day of the funeral, my father was laughing secretly, thinking no one was watching. I happened to see his face in a moment, and I clearly caught his expression. It wasn't a laugh born of sadness or confusion, but a smile of genuine joy, the kind of happiness I, as his daughter, recognized. My father was inwardly pleased with the death of my grandparents. He was probably considering various financial benefits. That smile was very unpleasant, and it felt terrifying to me as a child, making me cry. Perhaps it was taken as tears for the death of my grandparents. At that moment, my uncle put his hand on my shoulder and gently stroked it with a tender gesture. My eyes were red with tears, but my uncle's eyes, while filled with sadness, watched over me with warmth. Why was this so? Despite being blood brothers, my father and uncle had completely different reactions to our parents' death. At that time, my suspicions about my father deepened. Afterwards, my father's behavior changed significantly. His attitude towards my uncle became noticeably colder, and he would say things like, "Why should I have to take care of a useless person like you? You should be grateful just to be allowed to live here," he also said. "If you can't even pay rent, I should take all the inheritance," he declared. I didn't understand it at the time, but these statements were clearly unfair. Legally, the inheritance should be equally divided between siblings, but my father tried to monopolize it. My uncle had the strength to stand up to him and could have resorted to legal action if necessary. However, my uncle chose not to do so. While showing a saddened face, he didn't argue back or claim his share of the inheritance. Worried about my uncle, who seemed to have lost his will, I asked, "Are you okay?" To which he replied weakly, with a smile, "I'm frail and things aren't going well with my job, so it can't be helped." Day after day of verbal abuse from my father worsened my uncle's frail condition, leading to weight loss and a pale complexion. Despite this, my uncle always told me not to worry, smiling at me. However, 3 months after my grandparents passed away, my uncle was ultimately driven out of the house. "You're useless. Get out," my father said, and without saying or doing anything, my uncle left. "Uncle, don't go," I pleaded in despair, tugging at his arm, but he gently removed his hand from mine, placed it on my shoulder, and said, "Don't worry. Emily, you're strong, you'll be okay even without me." "But I'm worried about you," I replied. I was worried about my uncle, who was not healthy and couldn't hold a regular job, having to live on his own. As I looked at him with tears in my eyes, he said, "It's okay," and left. The farewell from my uncle was deeply saddening, but there was nothing a young child like me could do. Furthermore, I myself was soon in a situation where I couldn't afford to worry about others. 2 years after my grandparents passed away, the 8-year-old me was attending elementary school regularly, and my 6-year-old sister Sandy was about to enter elementary school as well. It all started when my mother mentioned that Sandy had been praised for being very smart in kindergarten. "This intelligence must definitely be inherited from me," my father exclaimed excitedly, and impulsively decided to have her take an IQ test. We were all astounded by the results. An IQ of 150. This is my DNA. The impressive number IQ 150 was displayed. Although I couldn't fully comprehend what made this so incredible, I understood that my sister was exceptionally gifted. "That's amazing, Sandy." He. "Thank you, big sis." When I casually praised her, she smiled joyfully. Those were truly happy times. But that was as good as it got. The developments that followed were the worst. "All right, let's have her take entrance exams," my father decided. So soon. My mother was surprised, but she was pushed by my father's unfounded confidence that if she's talented, it will be fine, and she got excited too. From then on, my sister began attending tutoring every day. Since my mother accompanied her, household chores were often neglected. As a result, the responsibility was shifted to me. Since your mother and Sandy are busy, you'll take care of the house, I was commanded. Thus, doing laundry and cleaning became part of my daily routine. After school, I had no time to play. I had to go straight home and finish the chores, or I would be scolded by my parents. Days began to appear where I would skip meals because I hadn't done the chores. "You're a failure, we can't spare time for you," I was scolded. "Why can't you get perfect scores?" was a routine scolding from my father for my grades in the 90s. "Really, can't you be a bit more like your sister?" my mother said. Even if I scored high on tests or came out on top at sports day, my parents neither praised me nor paid attention to me. I was just continually ignored. "Be like your sister, Sandy," was like a mechanical repetition. Moreover, they would add condescending words such as, "It's impossible for you, but Sandy is a genius. You're just incompetent." Sandy indeed had talent, and she made remarkable progress in a short time at tutoring, quickly passing the entrance exams. As a result, my parents became even colder towards me. They spared no expense on Sandy. I couldn't get new clothes and had to make do with ones that had become too small. Sandy could enjoy delicious meals. I got leftovers. Sandy was taken on trips. I had to stay home and watch the house. My parents clearly favored only Sandy. "This child has a promising future. She'll secure our old age," my father boasted. Should we make her a doctor, or perhaps a lawyer? Becoming a politician wouldn't be bad either, my mother pondered. "We're really lucky to have such a talented daughter," my father said proudly. My existence went unnoticed by my parents, and me, crying behind Sandy, continued to be overlooked. Then, when I was 10 years old, my parents made a cold declaration. "One child is enough. We don't need a failure like you. Sandy needs a lot of money to bloom her talents, so if you can pay the monthly rent of $1,000, we might reconsider," they said. What I was bewildered. "We're saying that one child, Sandy, is enough," my father continued. "That's impossible. What am I supposed to do alone?" I said. "Why don't you try contacting your uncle for now? We'll give you some pocket money. Figure it out on your own," they said, handing me a little bit of money, and I was driven out of the house. I cried and banged on the front door, asking to be let back in, but there was no response. The door remained closed. In despair, I headed to the station. Even at the age of 10, I had the necessary knowledge and could take the train. I asked people for directions and finally arrived at the apartment where my uncle lived. When the bell rang, my uncle came out, showing the same kind face as always. He looked surprised but invited me inside, and when I explained the situation, my uncle showed his anger. "What are they doing?" my uncle exclaimed. I wasn't being scolded myself, but I was tormented by guilt for being forced out. Not knowing what to do next, tears welled up in my eyes. At that moment, as I looked down, my uncle gently placed his hand on my head. That hand, memorable for its size and warmth, was full of compassion. It must have been hard, But don't worry anymore, my uncle said. But what should I do now? As you see, I'm prone to illness and have little income, so I'm poor, my uncle said with a wry smile as he looked at me. Although we had lived apart for a while, my uncle's expression had grown much stronger than before. Perhaps there had been some change in his feelings due to the distance from my father. Looking directly at me, my uncle said with a smile, I'm poor, but if you don't mind, Emily, I really want to be your parent. I'd like to become your foster father. I might not be very reliable, though. Before he finished speaking, I had already jumped into my uncle's broad chest. It was similar to my father's, yet entirely different. That chest gave me a great sense of security. You don't have to worry about anything anymore. Hearing that, I cried with relief, and my uncle gently stroked my back, comforting me. It felt like he was treating me with the deep love of a real parent. After that, I was raised by my uncle. As my uncle was indeed poor and often ill, life with him was not straightforward. However, there were always smiles in our home, and the laughter that I had forgotten while living with my parents returned in abundance with my uncle. It was a poor yet warm household indeed. My uncle continued to give me boundless love. With deep gratitude in my heart, I lived each day to the fullest. Whenever I tried hard, my uncle always praised me. Even if the results weren't great, he valued the effort itself. Encouraged by this, I worked even harder. Gradually, I began to forget about my parents who had never praised me. I grew up healthy under my uncle's care, and before I knew it, 20 years had passed. I am now already 30 years old. And now, there is a familiar face in front of me. Dad, Mom. It's been a while, Emily. Have you been well, my father says with a smile, fading from my distant memories. My eyes, directed at my father who has aged significantly and whose hair has thinned, show undisguised coldness. And for good reason. It's a what do you want now kind of situation. Unperturbed by my icy gaze, my father suggests, well, let's let bygones be bygones and get along as a family from now on. My reaction is predictable. What are you talking about? Get along as a family? You must be joking. Figures. A failure always has a bad attitude. Can't be helped. Maybe it's time to re-educate you. That's enough. Please go back home. I firmly stopped my father as he tried to enter the apartment. At that moment, my mother joined in, fueling the conflict. Emily, don't be stubborn and accept our help. You surely can't be happy living in such a run-down apartment, my mother blurted out. You have nothing to do with this. Please leave. No need to be so haughty. Come on, let us in. No, just go home. Let us in. Go home. Even though they've aged, they pushed with more strength than I expected. Maybe it's because there were two of them, which made it hard for me to push back. We kept shoving each other like kids playing push and shove, but I managed to stay calm until the moment my father tried to step over the threshold. That's when I gave them a hard push back. Who? Ah. The force sent both my parents tumbling onto the ground, landing on their backsides. I ended up standing above them, looking down. Ugh, you're so annoying. What did you just say? I'm busy, so can you just leave already? What kind of way is that to talk? How do you even see us as your parents? I haven't considered you my parents since the moment you threw me away. But we took care of you until you were 10. Until 10, huh? If there's any time I can say I was actually taken care of, it was only when my grandparents were around. Yet you survived, didn't you? That doesn't give you the right to act all high and mighty. As they struggled to stand up while holding their backs, my parents looked much smaller. Even though they're in their 50s, they already seem like they're in their 60s or 70s. You're the ones who said it yourselves, didn't you? That Sandy was enough. With your genius daughter, there's no reason for you to come see me now. Well, it's not so simple anymore. At my words, my father grimaced and responded in an irritated tone. Did something happen to Sandy? What? Did she end up in need or something? She became a lawyer. Well then, there's no problem, right? That's amazing, just what you'd expect from someone with an IQ of 150. Oh, or so we thought, until she suddenly disappeared. That's quite surprising. As I listened further, it turned out that Sandy had successfully graduated from law school, went to grad school, took the bar exam, and although she didn't pass on her first try, she eventually did and became a fully licensed lawyer after her training. So why would she go missing after all that? She left a note saying, "I won't be taking care of you two," and then she just vanished. That's a tough situation. So in short, she's abandoned you. Congratulations. There's nothing to celebrate. That ungrateful child, after all we did to raise her, this is how she repays us. Well, I guess that's what happens when true love is lacking. While my parents may have showered my sister with excessive attention, it likely felt like nothing more than suffocating control to her. Parents who change their behavior based on an IQ score. Parents who burden their children with unrealistic expectations. Parents who disguise their selfish desires as affection. It's no wonder my sister grew fed up with that environment. Actually, the company went under. Well, given the times, that's not surprising. We barely got any severance pay, and the unemployment benefits are about to run out. That's great news. It's not great at all. It's hard enough trying to find a new job at our age. That sounds rough. Their obvious frustration only made me smirk with disinterest. That's why we want you to take care of us. The sudden demand wiped the smile off my face. No. What did you say? How can you just abandon your parents like that? The only real parent I have is my uncle, who has taken care of me since I was 10. What? My response left my father speechless. You knew I was living with my uncle when you came to this apartment, didn't you? So why are you acting surprised now? Do you really think of him as your father? My uncle, who gave me genuine love, is my true father. My words, which implied that parents who don't show love aren't parents, left my parents with stunned expressions. Even though he was sick and weak, my uncle still worked hard to support me. I wanted to repay his efforts, so I worked hard too. Wait, does that mean you actually have a proper job? Well, kind of. As I shrugged, my father suddenly grabbed my shoulder tightly. Let go of me. So, you're angry and a bit embarrassed too, aren't you? Please listen to what I'm saying. No need to listen. I understand it all. You were lonely, weren't you? You're sulking because only your sister got all the attention, right? But deep down, you're happy to see your parents, aren't you? Stop creating your own story. Don't worry, from now on, we'll be proper parents and stay by your side. I had no idea what he was talking about. Could it be that my father is already showing signs of dementia? For a moment, I stared blankly at my parents, and their ridiculous expressions made me burst out laughing. Why are you laughing? Is it because you're happy? Haha, not at all. Just so you know, in the past 10 years, I never once thought about either of you. Thanks to my uncle, I had a fulfilling life. As my parents stared at me in shock from my sudden laughter, I continued to speak. Actually, I received a scholarship to graduate from university. Oh, really? Then you must have gotten into a good company. Yes, I did. I got a job at a well-known big corporation. That's great to hear. And through an unexpected connection, I also got married. Oh, well, then I have to meet the groom and give my greetings. No, that won't be necessary. No, it's only proper that I should. That's impossible. He's currently overseas. Oh, I see. Wait, what? By the way, Uncle is also overseas. What? Your uncle too? I thought you were living here alone. I figured your sickly uncle had already. Don't go assuming my uncle is dead. He got a job assignment abroad, and since it's in a place with a good environment for his health, he went along. Now he's happily spending time playing with my kids. You have kids too. My parents were almost too stunned to process all the surprises I was throwing at them. With their bewilderment on full display, I smiled brightly. At first, Uncle wasn't keen on living together with us, but he eventually agreed. Now we're all living happily as one family. Well, in that case, we could move overseas too. Sure, go ahead. But we won't live together, and I won't be taking care of you. You're free to do what you want with your own money. That's impossible. Are you really going to abandon your parents? You're the ones who abandoned me first. My patience finally snapped at their selfish demands. My parents' faces turned pale. I have no gratitude toward you for anything, but I owe a great deal to my uncle. From now on, I intend to repay him for all he's done for me. That may be so, but at least send us a little money. Please. Uncle never touched the money I sent him and continued to live in this old apartment the whole time. But now, he's finally agreed to leave here and live with us overseas. I'm just here to finalize the paperwork. What? On the very last day of leaving this shabby apartment, the fact that you two show up, what a coincidence. Wait, what? You're leaving. The process is already done. I'm just returning the keys and then I'll head back to our home overseas. What about us? Are you just going to leave your mother and me behind? my father asked in shock, and I nodded clearly. "Thank you for abandoning me." I said that with a smile, leaving them speechless. "Truly thank you. Because of you, I'm happy now." With those words, I walked past them. How does it feel to be abandoned by the daughter you once threw away? I asked one last time, but there was no response. Without waiting for an answer, I left. It felt like this was the final goodbye to my real parents. After that, I returned to my home overseas. Throughout my life with Uncle, I worked hard and persevered. That effort paid off, and I secured a job at a reputable company. Later, I got an opportunity to work abroad, and it was there that I met the man I married. Uncle shed tears of joy as he celebrated our union. Soon we had children, and we invited Uncle to join us, and now we're all happily living together as a family. My husband, our children, and of course Uncle too. And I hope I can meet someone wonderful like you did, Big Sis said, my sister, who stood beside me, smiling as she watched the kids play in the garden. Don't worry, you'll find someone great. You're finally free from our parents' control, I reassured her with a smile. That being said, I really need to get used to this new job, my sister said. Why not try getting a law license in this country, I suggested. I'm not interested in being a lawyer. I've had enough of doing what our parents wanted. I want to take on a job that I truly want to do, she replied. You're right, I agreed. Right after our parents abandoned me, a letter from my sister arrived at my uncle's house. In it, she described how she was suffering under the excessive expectations and pressure from our parents. After discussing it with my uncle, we secretly arranged to meet my sister on her way home from school. We kept in touch without our parents knowing. My sister wanted to live with us, but with my uncle's financial situation, it was impossible for him to support both of us. More than that, our parents would never allow it, so my sister endured living with them until she became an adult and could plan her escape. It was a tough ordeal, but she overcame it and finally gained her freedom. While our parents were distracted, celebrating her success as a lawyer, she moved out and became independent. Of course, I was there to help her. Although she secured a job here, she's struggling to adapt to the new language and environment, but I'm sure she'll be fine. There's no one more resilient and hardworking than my sister, who withstood the strict upbringing of our parents, so she'll adapt quickly. On the other hand, although I was worried about Uncle said he's planning to attend a language school, I told her, and she nodded with a smile. That's great. It's never too late to learn. His health has improved a lot, so he should enjoy life more now. You're absolutely right. Our parents quickly ran out of money after they selfishly squandered the inheritance. Even though they continued to invest in my sister, they eventually lost their jobs. When they sold the house, they were left with very little, as it was tied up with home improvement loans. They've been asking relatives for financial help, but everyone has responded coldly, leaving them to live in poverty. I heard from a relative that arguments between them are constant. I believe there should never be favoritism between siblings or unfair treatment of one's children, I said, reflecting on the past. You're absolutely right. Once again, my sister nodded in agreement with my words. No matter what happens, I'll always be here to support you, Sandy. You've already done more than enough. Thank you so much, big sis. Seeing how much my sister had grown brought tears to my eyes at that moment. What do you mean by support? Suddenly, I felt a gentle hand on my shoulder. It felt slightly smaller than before, but still warm. I turned around, squinting as I smiled. Thank you. Huh? As I turned, I saw my uncle standing there, looking surprised at my words. I smiled warmly and said, "Thank you, Dad. I love you."